Hi everybody, this is a walkthrough for Assignment 2 for English Curriculum Studies 1. There are two parts to the assignment. The first is writing an argumentative essay, and the second is developing a resource to accompany the unit that you developed in Assignment 1. We're going to talk through each part of the assignment and the criteria. You can find the task sheet on Blackboard. Now today is the 25th of March. I have updated the task sheet. So if you've downloaded or printed out a previous version, make sure that you go on to Assessment 2 and download the updated copy. It's got updated in the file name. There are only minor changes, but still things that you'll need to be aware of. Okay. So let's look at what the assignment asks you to do. So the aim of it is to develop your skills in resource development and linking that to the Australian Curriculum for English. And it's also getting you to consider the role of Year 7 in high schools and some middle school theory. Theory will really develop your identity as a teacher, so it's important that we start to consider it nice and early. We'll come back to this bit in a moment. Okay, so you're going to read the following provocation. Teachers in Queensland secondary schools are neither prepared nor trained to assist students to make the transition into high school in Year 7. You're going to respond to that statement in the form of an argumentative essay. You're going to take a position on that statement and write an argumentative essay in response. The second part of the assignment is to prepare a resource. Coming back up here, the resource can be for any of the lessons in the unit plan from Assessment 1. If you don't want to use the same unit from Assessment 1, you can choose any other unit from the work program under Assessment. So if you developed your unit in Assignment 1, you really didn't enjoy it, you've had enough of that, you want something different, you can choose a different unit from the work program. But I would suggest that you do use a lesson from your first assignment. It would make more sense to do that. So you're going to pick any lesson from the unit and develop just one resource. So one activity for students. In that, you're demonstrating your ability to cater for Year 7 students. So you're training to be a high school teacher, and now Year 7 is part of high school. We're making sure that you are able to teach to the Year 7 level and help with the transition. You're going to include a brief 200-word statement about the aims of your resource, and it's linked to the Australian curriculum. So it's a total of 1,500 words. The criteria is on the second page here. Let's talk through each part in detail. The assignment's 1,500 words. The essay is 1,000 words, give or take 10%. Try and stick to around about 1,000 words. The resource is going to be the equivalent of roughly 500 words. How many words it is will really depend on what kind of resource you develop. And your 200-word statement is included in that 500 words. Don't worry too much about this 500-word limit, okay? Do what you need to do to develop that resource. I don't mind if it's more. Try not to, be underneath that, because that would only be around about 300 words in your resource, but it's difficult to put a number on developing a resource just because of the diversity in how we can present resources. But please try and stick to 1,000 words for your essay. It's due at the end of week 9 by midnight on Friday the 1st of May. And as with Assignment 1, you will need to email it to my email address. And again, look out for the reply email confirming that I've received your assignment. If your resource is something more concrete, it's not a website or a worksheet or something like that, something better submitted in hard copy, please give that to me in the workshop in week 9, so the 30th of April. Let's look at part 1, the essay. This is the statement that we're responding to. So it's quite a strong statement. It's a provocation, okay, and you're going to need to take a position on that. So what would you do? Your first step is going to be to go away and do some research into this. So you're going to look at why Year 7 was put into high school in Queensland. If you're an external student or not in Queensland or not in Australia, this statement might seem a little bit peculiar. The context for this statement is that in Queensland, until 2015, high school was years 8 to 12 in most schools. Some schools in the independent sector were years 7 to 12, and in other states in Australia, many of them have had year 7 in high school for a number of years now, but it's new for Queensland. The past couple of years, there have been some trial schools trialling having year 7 in high school, and from 2015, year 7 is in all high schools in Queensland. So that's the context for this statement. So you're going to do some research around this. So it says that teachers are not prepared or trained to help students with the transition. So you need to go away and research, well, what measures were put in place to prepare and train teachers? What did actually happen? And when we're talking about assisting students in the transition, well, what are the needs of year 7 students? And we call this middle years. This is a part of middle years. So go away and look at some middle years theory. So you'll go and do your research. Based on your research, you're going to take a position or develop a thesis in response to this statement here. And then you're going to write your essay and support it with research, perhaps extending on the research that you did first up here. When you're going away and researching how teachers have been prepared, a few tips here. Look at Flying Start policy. That's what the government called this whole initiative of putting year 7 into high school. They called it Flying Start. I've put a link for that in Blackboard under Assessment 2, Flying Start. And there's all sorts of information on here about students and teachers. Okay, so use that resource. That will give you some background information with the government perspective. You're going to think about the curriculum, the Australian curriculum, and you're going to think about some age-appropriate expectations, and that's where the middle schooling theory comes in. What can we expect of students in year 7? So students who are around 12 to 13 years old. You're going to look at the professional standards for teachers, just as you did in assignment 1 for the rationale. Remember that the standards are for you under learning resources and useful documents and links. The National Professional Standards for Teachers. So looking at what the standards expect of teachers and how that's relevant to students in year 7 and assisting students in year 7. And middle schooling theory. So you'll use the QUT library to do a search for that theory. There's lots out there. You shouldn't have any difficulty finding middle schooling theory. Based on what you've researched, you're going to make a judgment. So a response to that statement. You don't need to take an extreme opinion. You don't have to be one or the other. You don't have to say, yes, teachers are entirely prepared for this transition, and you don't need to say, no, they're absolutely nowhere near prepared for this. You can lie somewhere in the middle if that's what your research shows. The structure of your essay. I'm fairly confident that by now, being grad dip students, you know how to write an argumentative essay, but I've put a resource here that's come from QUT's SiteWrite website, in case you're not sure. Okay, so this is a link here that you can follow. Go to SiteWrite, and this is a basic structure that you can follow with an introduction that states your thesis, your body paragraphs. You might have 2 body paragraphs. You're only doing 1,000 words, so you don't need to go into a whole lot of detail, and then your conclusion. Let's look at the criteria. So how to get a 7, if that's what you're interested in. Perhaps You have your own personal goal, but let's look at the criteria and what you need to do ultimately for a 7. I'm going to compare it with a 4. So from an excellent through to a satisfactory, just as a point of contrast to highlight what you can do to do very well in this assignment. So this is the first criterion for a 7, for excellent. So have a read of this. So this means that you're going to need to refer to the Australian curriculum thoroughly, and you're going to refer to literature thoroughly. When I say thoroughly, I am aware that it's only 1,000 words, so thoroughly for a 1,000 word limit. This isn't a 2,000 or 3,000 or more word essay, okay? So don't be too alarmed that you're not going to go into heaps of detail, but as much as you can manage for 1,000 words. So you're referring to the curriculum, you're referring to literature, so that's the policies, middle school and theory and so on, and you're going to use APA correctly, making sure that your referencing is spot on. You're referencing when you're supposed to, and your style is correct. For this criterion, to receive a 4, you're only going to briefly refer to the curriculum, you're just going to mention it, and you're only going to refer to a couple of pieces of literature. And there will be a few errors in your referencing. You might miss some references, or you might make some mistakes in the way that you reference. The second criterion, here it is. And that list there gives you a fairly clear idea of what kinds of documents you need to be referring to, what literature you can reference in your assignment. This means that you're going to make very concise, logical and reasoned arguments in relation to these documents. So making concise, logical and reasoned arguments. So not just mentioning the different policies, but actually analysing and weaving them into your argument to support your thesis. So that's for a 7. If you look at a 4 for the same criterion, you would refer to but don't really analyse these sources. So you might tell me that there are professional standards for teachers and some parts apply to year 7. You're going to mention that there is such thing as middle schooling theory and here's what it is, but you're not really going to analyse those sources and you wouldn't really weave that into your thesis. So you would rehash what the literature is saying, but don't really link it to your thesis. The final criterion for this part of your assignment. So this is to do with your style. So you're going to use for a 7, a very clear and logical structure, something like the one that I showed you on site, right? Something with a very clear statement, thesis statement. Make sure that in that opening paragraph I can put my finger on your thesis statement. And from there, make sure that in each body paragraph, I can see a link back to that thesis. So use string throughout your essay. Tie your literature off your thesis. Make sure that every paragraph is coming back to proving your thesis. And you're going to write using your best English skills, so you'll have spot on spelling, grammar, and punctuation. In contrast, a 4, there will be some sort of structure, but perhaps not a traditional essay structure. You'll use more informal language and there'll be some errors in your spelling, grammar and punctuation. So I hope that gives you an idea of what you need to do for your essay. We will do a practice in class over the next couple of weeks, but hopefully that's enough to get you started on that part. Part 2 is the resource. So remember that you're choosing any resource from any lesson in your unit plan. It can be just a resource for one activity, for half a lesson, for a whole lesson, for a couple of lessons, whatever you want to do. So to develop the resource, you're going to consider the analysis and design steps of the ADDIE model. So you're not going to be doing implementation or evaluation. You're just doing an analysis of your context and some design. You can make the resource for any phase of the unit and any lesson in the unit. And creativity is your friend. You can be as creative as you want to be. Okay, there's really not many limits on what you can do. It needs to be a realistic resource, and something that you could put into your portfolio, proudly present in your interview, and perhaps use when you're teaching. So make sure that it's realistic, but be as creative as you can. Choose carefully. A resource is a printout from a website. Okay, that is a resource. Giving students a URL for a website, that's a resource. But if you submit a URL for your assignment, you're not going to do very well. Okay, so make sure that you develop a resource that shows what you can do. Okay, use this as an opportunity to show off your skills. When we look at the criteria, what you need to do will be a little clearer. Just one more resource to help you with developing the resource. Under Assessment and Assessment 2, there's an ADDIE model checklist. Now, this isn't a comprehensive checklist, and there might be things that you would add or modify, but it's a starting point. Bring that over. So this is a planning sheet for you for the analysis and design steps of the ADDIE model. So consider things like the age and year level, the background of your students, and so on. And then there's a section in the middle here where you can just write a summary of your resource and then the design of your resource. So that's just a planning tool to help you. Let's look at the criteria. For a 7, so the focus here is on presenting an interesting, suitable, creative resource. So for a 7, you're going to develop a resource that will be engaging for your students. Make sure that you're developing something that would be interesting. Okay, this isn't for an average lesson, for a boring lesson, for a dull lesson. This resource should be for one of your whiz-bang lessons, a lesson that the students absolutely love. So as interesting as you can make it. Make sure that it's suitable for Year 7 students and Year 7 students at Hartfield State High School. And develop a resource that is somewhat original. Okay, you don't have to start from scratch. It's okay to take inspiration from other resources, but make sure that in part it is original. In contrast, for a 4, you'll develop a resource that will be only a little bit interesting, a little bit dull, but okay, for students at any school, not specifically Hartfield, and perhaps for students much older or much younger. This is the second part to the criteria for your resource. This is where you're going to think about how your resource can be differentiated. You don't have to create several different versions of your resource, just as long as it can be differentiated and that's clear. You might mention that in your 200 words, how it can be differentiated, but make sure that your resource can be differentiated to suit the different learners at Hartfield. You're going to write your 200 words explaining the aim of your resource, and that will be very clear and well written. Please don't put too much effort into that though, okay? You don't need to worry about it referencing extensively. You don't need to bring in any other literature to justify it. It's mostly just so that I understand the context of your resource, so that I can understand where it fits, what lesson it fits into. Remember that I can go back to your first assignment and have a look at that lesson in more detail. So just mention which lesson it's from and what your intention is for that resource. You're going to use some technology to develop your resource, or make it a resource that students need to use technology. And you're going to make sure that the resource aligns with the Australian curriculum. In contrast, for a 4, you'll develop a resource that's difficult to differentiate. Your aim for the resource will be quite vague, and your resource won't really align very well with the curriculum, let alone Year 7 curriculum. So I hope that gave you an idea of what you need to do for your resource. Weeks 5, 6 and 7, I think, we're going to be looking at resources in class and a few different ideas. To finish up, if you find you're in a position where you think that you need an extension, the first thing you need to do is notify somebody as soon as possible. Okay, don't leave it, do it as soon as you realise that you might need a little bit of extra time. I'm just going to open up okay, so QUT has a new policy from the start of last year that if your assessment is submitted late and you haven't got an approved extension, then the assignment can't be marked. So it's really imperative that your assignment is in on time. If you do need to apply for an extension, you need to come onto here. This isn't under student. You need to apply for an extension through here. Okay, so it's a central application that you'll do. Okay, I'm logged into my staff one, so it won't let me do it now, but so you need to come onto students and studying assessment and put an application in through there. And you can also refer to the MOP, so to the policies and procedures of QUT, if you want a little bit more information about why you might be eligible for an extension. So if you have any issues, feel free to email me as soon as possible and we can work something out. But please be aware that if you submit your assignment late without an extension, the assignment can't be marked. And if you do want to apply for an extension, it can go through this central system here under studying. If you have any questions about the assignment, please email me anytime, as you did with Assessment 1. I'll try and be a little bit more diligent in adding the frequently asked questions to the Assessment 2 page. So down underneath here, I'll add questions that I'm getting through quite a lot. All right, thank you.